Hey, Mark, can you hear me okay? I'm going to have to ask you to unmute yourself again. There you
I
go.
got it.
Perfect.
I can hear
Excellent.
you well. How are you,
Awesome.
Sean?
Yeah, I'm cold. I live in the
Where do you live
cold.
now? Where are you?
I'm in a little town called Snohomish, Washington, which is about 30 miles northeast of Seattle. So
Oh,
I'm
okay.
kind of, I've been,
Wait,
the last
God's country.
25 years, it's pretty up here, but I spent 25 years in Texas, New
Yeah.
Mexico, Arizona, and California. I'm not used to, I got to get hardened back up to cold weather. I lived in Wyoming and Chicago for much of my life prior to that. But anyway, you're still out in West Virginia, is that correct?
Yeah, heck yeah. West Virginia.
Awesome,
God's
good
country
stuff.
out here
Well,
too.
first of all, Mark, thank you for taking the time to do this. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And thanks for what you're doing in general. For those people that just aren't familiar with your background, would you mind just sharing a little brief introduction?
Yeah, so I got my Air Force jacket here. So I'm 55. I think you're 55 too, right, Sean? I think we entered the good U.S. Air Force about the same time.
Yeah, I was born in '67, and I'll be
Okay, yeah.
55 in January. So I'm
Okay, yeah, I was born in
right almost there.
'66. So yeah, I went to medical school on an Air Force scholarship. Didn't know what path that would take me. I was always one of those hyperactive kids into sports, and my early life was spent running around a track a lot, and so I got a little bit into the health and fitness area. Went to University of Virginia, ran track and field there, cross country, and stayed there for medical school. And didn't have any money for medical school, so I saw this little flyer in the elevator. No money for med school, talk to the recruiter. And so, I talked to a Navy, an Army, and an Air Force recruiter. I didn't know anything about either of them, but I knew the Air Force probably had better VOQs and didn't sleep in tents for months at a time. So I decided to sign up for that one to help me pay for med school. And I thought I always wanted to be an orthopedist like you, Sean, because they were the only docs that I was exposed to as an athlete. I broke myself all the time. Us runners break ourselves in different ways than the football players. For us, it's all overuse injuries, intrinsic injuries, but we're always hurt. And I shadowed a couple really cool orthopedic docs in med school. And, they were like the mad scientists of biomechanics and stuff. So I got into that, and it inspired me to go to med school. But then when I got into med school, I realized I was more interested more in kind of the not so much the orthopedic side, putting rods and plates and things, but I liked kind of the movement part of it and trying to help people stay fit and fix their overuse injuries. And that led me, and I liked fixing fractures, and that led me into family medicine and flight medicine. So, I trained in the military as a GP family doc with kind of a subspecialty in flight medicine, and that's kind of working with air crew and helping keep air crew fit. Didn't know anything about diet and nutrition until I was called up in about 2012 to work on a project for the Air Force involving their fitness test, because the new chief of staff came on board at the time, General Schwartz, and he tightened the screws on the fitness test. And he made the run 60% of the test. And if you failed the run, you were out of the Air Force. Were you still in then, Sean, or not? Were you still reservist in about 2012?
I'd gotten out in 2011, so
Okay.
I just got out.
So
So
we were
yeah,
doing the bikes test, the step test. Remember all those tests, and everyone would be just like have some complaint or some whine, and then General Schwartz said, "Well, I'll give you time to train. I run at 4 in the morning, so you can you can come run with me." But the failure rates went up, and there was significant. There was a report in the Air Force called a lost man days report, and running injuries after basketball were the number 2 cause of missed work days. And the difference was these were like self-inflicted under supervised duty time. Supervised PT were hurting people. So I got brought on to work on this project because there were a ton of failures, went up to like 20 to 25%. And I noticed immediately that obesity was probably the biggest driver of failures, not lack of running. And I'd learned traditionally myself, eat less, exercise more, 500 calories a day deficit, and in a week you'll lose a pound. That's what we all learned, and that's what I told people. And it never really worked, but kind of we just figured it was the patient's fault. So it was kind of a weird set of circumstances, Sean. So I was just kind of, I had 6 months assigned to this project. So I got to do a deep dive, and I traveled to like 50 Air Force bases, and I'd be in the base gym, and they'd be dudes like you that didn't like to run, and here's some skinny runner guy, and they don't want to be there. But I'd ask this question, there was kind of the PT test remediation tour. And I'd say, has anyone ever kept 50 pounds off for a year, kept it off? Be 100 people in base gym, and maybe one raise their hand. And I'd say, well, what did you do, senior airman? And well, I got rid of all the sugar, or they'd say, this is 2012, or I did paleo, right? In those days, there was no paleo junk food. That was basically eat plants and animals, or, occasionally a gutsy one would say they did Atkins, I was a doc, so they were afraid I was going to yell at them. But like, that was the observational evidence, I never once, this was before a lot of the low carb literature. The term LCHF or keto hadn't even been in the lexicon. There weren't websites or anything, but it was pretty clear that it was carbohydrates. And then I just, in random searching, I came across this article by Gary Taubes, New York Times article. It was called "Maybe It's All Been a Big Fat Lie." Had a piece of steak on the cover of the New York Times magazine, and I read that, and I was like, I think this guy's right, because I just witnessed my state of West Virginia. And then I read his book like 2 or 3 times, Good Calories, Bad Calories. Maybe some of you all have read that 450-page book, 1,000 references. And I'm like, okay, I think we have the food pyramid upside down. After seeing all that with the Air Force and reading all that, and, some of the Finney and Bullock's work were out at that time. But it's kind of coincidentally at the same time, I'm on duty at White Pat, and they did an A1C on me, and my A1C was 6.3. And, I kind of look like this. And I was like, that's weird. So they send me over to the endocrine clinic, and, they drew a lab called a C-peptide, which I'd never drawn before. I didn't know what it was as a GP. I knew it had something to do with insulin. And my level was 0.3, which is barely detectable. And then they put a CGM on me. Back then you couldn't see the screens real time like the one I have on right now. I've got a Libre on right now. It was like a box you wore, and then they download it. But what was happening with me was I would, I was always chasing sugar because I had didn't have a first phase insulin response that was kind of gone, whether it was autoimmune, but I had a little bit of a second phase insulin response, and I was highly insulin sensitive. So I would, crave the carbohydrates because I was a runner. That's what we ate. So my sugar would crank up to like 250, but then I would crash like hard. And I was waking up every morning for like 5 years at like 2 or 3 in the morning, needing to eat, just like clockwork. And I thought it was just because I was a runner. Well, I must be just burning all these calories. But basically I was becoming diabetic. And as you know, Shawn, if you're diagnosed with diabetes or on diabetic meds, you're MEB, right? You're medically boarded. So I'm having read Gary and witnessed this, I didn't have any fear to for myself, flip the food pyramid upside down. That's how I've lived the last 10 years. But I brought that to my hospital here, to my patients. I have a clinic now devoted to this, and we can get into that as we talk. But yeah, it's been a slow forward progress, with taking your punches along the way. But I think as a group, thanks to people like you, Shawn, and others out there pushing the science and the people, right? Because you can't, when people are dramatically changing their health, you can't unsee that. Maybe some on this call right now, I mean, you're the observational evidence that this isn't magical thinking. But that's, I'll kind of stop there. It's a lonely road in academic medical centers trying to teach this. So, yeah.
Yeah, this would be interesting. I didn't realize that you'd had an issue with the low C peptide. Back then, I kind of you kind of remember some of the story, but have you since that time updated C peptide levels? Is it kind of falling more into a normal range now, or what's going on?
I haven't redrawn my C peptide, but if you were to look at my monitor, so I probably still don't have a first phase insulin response. So like the other day, I had a piece of fruit. I went running, and I wasn't going to get back to lunch for a little while, and I had just one piece of watermelon, and you can see from my screen right there, I'm hanging out, and I just have a piece of watermelon, and my sugar up to the Libre 2 to like 220. Yes, if I have any fruit, and I finally got my A1C below 5.7. I was without, early days of this, I thought fruit, until you have a CGM on, you kind of kid yourself to think you can get away with things, but you don't see it. And my A1C would always hover, 6.3 to 5.9 range, even with kind of upside down food pyramid, but I probably still was having, a little too much fruit for what my body could tolerate. But my HDLs have gone from like 45 to 110. So my CAC score is 0. But I'll live the rest of my life in bliss the way I eat right now. I feel good and I'm healthy.
Well, perhaps depending upon what happens with the climate emergency, you may not be able to eat that way. That's a different topic. But let me ask you
I have
about,
friends with chickens, which is good. I have friends with chickens that either give me the eggs or they actually, they render them. So we have kind of food co-op. So like I have a CSA for chickens. So it's give you a bird a week.
There are physicians out there that are saying that CGMs should not be utilized for people. I mean, outside of, maybe a type 1 diabetic, there's no, CGMs can only bring bad, because what it does is it makes people think, oh my God, fruit is a bad fruit, or fruit is a bad food. And therefore the CGM is giving us misinformation, and we should just not have that information. What do you say about that? I mean, if you got somebody, my blood glucose goes up to 220 when I eat a hunk of watermelon, is that problematic? I mean, most people would argue it is, but there's people out there saying that, physicians saying, no, we shouldn't allow people access to this data. Do you have any concern about that?
Carl, back in med school, we learned how to do a history and physical exam. So are you someone, is it a problem? Is it not a problem? What's your A1C? Do you have cardiovascular disease? Do you have insulin resistance? That's just one marker to multiple things that could be going on with your health. If you're an otherwise perfectly healthy person with a normal A1C and you have a glucose rise and it comes down, and every other marker is completely well, I still wouldn't do that to yourself every day, because glucose spikes ultimately are inflammatory. But certainly if someone has a CAC score, so if anyone has any plaque on their arteries and they're having glucose spikes, we know, I could find the reference, I gave a talk on this, but that can create plaque instability, which would lead to a plaque rupture. If you have a CAC of 0, meaning someone has no plaque on their arteries at all, you can get away with a little bit more. But once you have plaque on your arteries, and people need to know that, right? If you're a patient, go get a coronary calcium score or a CT angiogram, of your coronaries, and just see if you've got plaque. And that's kind of a good baseline. Like, are you healthy or not healthy? Like, if you're not healthy, that scenario might ultimately cause harm after, a million paper cuts. But if you're otherwise well, maybe it won't. I'm not too worried about an occasional one like that because my score is 0, but you feel like FLC, right? So when you feel like crap is when you see it crashing down. That's when people don't feel good. And, I like to feel good, but, you don't want to do that every day because you don't feel good.
Yeah, there's a question in here from Hope asking about HDL. There is, I guess some evidence that higher HDL is better, and some of it may be genetic related, or some, back and forth on how meaningful that actually is. But she's asking, how do you raise that? Now, I'm familiar with, alcohol as a mean, that's not the best mean.
Got a little red wine, and maybe that's, exercise, saturated fats, healthy saturated fats, and reversing insulin resistance. It's not so much what you eat that's going to raise it. It's, if you're highly insulin resistant, metabolic syndrome, you have low HDL, high triglycerides. It's a packaging problem in the liver. So, I see all kinds of patients with HDLs of 20, triglycerides in the multiples of hundreds, and they'll flip their diet, and 6-12 months their HDLs are up. But a lot of these, they're not going to go up to 110. But if I can get someone's HDL from 20 to 40, but it's more the trigs are probably the bigger marker of risk, and the HDL to triglyceride ratio kind of coming more along the lines of 1-to-1, meaning the same, if your HDL is 60, your trigs are 60. But really, if you're out there listening, there is a lab test which only cost about $99. It's called an LPIR score through LabCorp. And what that does, it actually measures insulin resistance by a multitude of markers. And it'll put, like, you can't look at one part of a lipid panel and make any judgment out of the health of the individual. So that LPIR score is powerful And in the women's health study, 28,000 women, 21 years, that lab value, if you were in the worst quartile, represented about a 6 to 7 times risk of cardiovascular disease. LDL by itself was like 1.3 odds. And that was only if you had small particle LDL. So LDL, large particle, posed no risk at all. So that's pattern A LDL. So LDL is kind of a mix of good or bad, right? So look at the whole spectrum. But I think we just finished a study, Shawn, on CGMs, a pilot study. So we took new diabetes patients, right? No medications. And we had 15 people in the pilot. It's a small pilot. So we gave them a little low carb guide, put a CGM on them and said, have at it, go figure it out. And the average A1C reduction was 2 over 4 months, wow. No medication. 2/3 met the current ADA definition of remission of diabetes. That's a new definition the ADA now has come out with, because there wasn't consensus, do we call it reversal, remission, metformin, no metformin. But so the ADA's current definition of remission, which is also backed up by Australia and the UK, is A1C less than 6.5, 3 months off meds. So at least that's like, if you use that word. So 2/3 of these patients met remission. And that's like, okay, the average remission in standard of care of diabetes is 0. So that's actually like pretty good, right? It's not definitive proof of anything. It's 15 patients, but it sets the stage that, okay, diabetes can go into remission. And people need support. And we didn't even have a support arm. We just gave them a book, right? And they had the monitor, which was like their wingman. We didn't have coaching, or we didn't have any Virta Health level daily remote patient monitoring. Gosh, you get that on board. And maybe that other third that didn't achieve it, who have processed food issues. And that's what I discovered in that trial was, people, as we all know, some people can just quit smoking and drop them. And other people, it's like, no, they're just, stress and boredom, and they just can't get off the food. But that's just a little pilot data. We should have that published here in a couple months. It's submitted for publication now. But that's the CGM. That's the power, right? Those people are going to save themselves.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's truly fascinating, and I think it's going. Hopefully, we'll have more people adopt that sort of, because it's an easy intervention. Here, you wear this for 3 months and get back with me, and just pay attention to what your glucose is. That would probably, make it easy for a lot of people. The one, you mentioned, and we have this paradigm: good cholesterol, bad cholesterol. LDL being bad, HDL being good. But maybe we should redefine and say good LDL, bad LDL. That might be the next sort of iteration on this, which, if you could get success on that would be really, really neat. There's a question in here that I just wanted to address from Kat about can a CAC score be lowered on a zero carb diet? I think that's controversial. I know that, like I mentioned, that David Ludwig's done a big study on this carnivore diet cohort, 2,000 people, and they had a small percentage of them did have CAC scores, and the overall trend was to lower their CAC score. So that's going to be interesting when that gets, and that's going to be published in the next few days. By the time this goes to podcast, it'll already be published and out for public consumption. So I think that's pretty interesting there. Let me ask you, because
let me throw one other thing on the CAC though, Shawn. The CAC, so what we want is to stabilize it, right? So once you have it there, some people who go on low carb diets and fix their entire metabolic syndrome spectrum, they may actually increase their CAC a little bit, but it's more stable. So that's a tougher thing to measure, but it won't necessarily go away. But we know that unstable plaque is the bad news. So maybe one day there's going to be a marker of stability of plaque. So things can calcify, but hard calcium that's not unstable, you could die of old age with that, right? You're cool. It's the unstable plaque. But lots to learn about CAC for sure. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt there.
No, I wanted to, one of the things that, and there's a number of physicians now that are sort of promoting the sort of low carb diets and have had success with that. But one thing remarkably that you've been able to do that very few people have been able to do is actually impact the hospital food system to where, most people that go to order a low carb diet, it doesn't exist. But is that still in place where you're at the hospital you're at? Have you still been able to manage to keep that in place?
Yeah, it's in place. So we have 10-gram carb menus. You can order that, but sadly, not many doctors order that. So, it's a bottom-up education. We need top-down help. In COVID, the COVID wards are feeding patients tons of sugar. They have the cytokine storm. They're put on dexamethasone and their sugars blow up. And we know that's poor outcomes in COVID. It's just a contributor. So it's there, but I wish it was the first line, right? I wish it was the obvious and first choice. Well, if someone has diabetes, well, sure, let's just not feed them sugar and not give them sliding scale insulin, because unstable sugars create plaque instability, certainly in a cardiac patient. To feed a cardiac patient the cardiac diet, which it sometimes is 200 grams of low-fat carbohydrates, and they're in for an acute coronary syndrome. And then we give them a slug of 10 units of short-acting insulin. We should know that that is not smart. But again, it's hard. Institutional change is hard, and you just can't give up because the science is there. But trying to change the way people practice who have been doing the same thing again and again and again, it's easy to stay with the herd. If you're a disruptor, you can be called out, and it's a lonely place to keep doing this in academic institutions.
Yeah, there was some thought about an evolutionary disadvantage for leaving the herd, and so humans have this herd mentality that if thousands of years ago you wandered from the tribe and did your own thing, your survival rate was probably lower. So that we kind of learned to kind of herd together, at least collectively. So there's some of that.
I appreciate all of you, right? Because you're the ones who make me go to work every day. It's a lonely place trying to do this where I am right now. No one has my back.
Is that loneliness? Yeah, that's tough. But are you finding that? Are you having some people that are converting over to this, or is there?
Heck yeah, yeah. But
for
the
me,
majority
it was
don't.
just, yeah, and that's because I think most, if we look at most healthcare in general, when I can remember looking at even physicians, but certainly the nursing staff and they're not particularly healthy. They're no healthier than anyone else, and in some cases, particularly the shift workers.
Mm-hmm.
They may be in worse health than everybody else. And so you have to I don't think a physician really changes his mind until it impacts them personally. That's just been my experience. Until they personally become diabetic or personally have chest pain or something like that, then they wake up. But are you finding that education is enough, or is it got to be real personal to make somebody make a change?
Yeah, it's a great question. You would hope and think that we're scientific thinkers, right? So we're scientific critical thinkers. Is when you see something that's not working and you look at the trajectory of obesity and diabetes, it gets worse and worse and worse, that we would critically look at what we're doing and not blame the patient. But again, I don't think, doctors were trained to, we practice, right? We're not scientists, so I try to play that side in my job. I do research, I write papers. So I'm trying to keep that critical eye. I don't know if what I'm doing is right or wrong, but I'll study it and try to understand the science. But when we did the hospital change, it actually was the nurses who drove the change, because they would come into a patient room and we'd go through Tim Noakes's food list, right? Back then, right? It was the green, orange, red list, right? We'd go through that with the patient, and we had, several nurses lose 50 up to 150 pounds. They'd bring these food lists home to their spouses. So the nursing and in the kitchen staff, we had a couple kitchen workers whose A1Cs went from 10 to 6. All these staff folks are just doing this. So that drove the change. It was kind of a bottom-up change that allowed us to do this. And then our dean at the time had lost about 30 pounds on a low-carb diet. So when we presented it, and it got pushed back that this was, quote, against the guidelines, right? Because the guidelines is 60 grams of carbs at that time, and he's like, no, this is fine. It's fine, right? So finally, I got the top. You have to get the bottom up to really drive it, and then the top down to approve it, and then they can get out of the way. I mean, then that led to, then we got all the sugar drinks out of the hospital too, about a year later, all the beverage machines and, for patients, there's no sugar drinks in our hospital at all right now for patients, staff, cafeteria, other than if you're a post-op kid, with an appy, we'll give you some juice or something. But as far as just, I want to drink, we won't bring you that. And didn't get much pushback from that. And that's been here now for about 5 years. So that's pretty good. But we're a small hospital. So, we have a sister hospital with 300 beds. We're 24-bed critical access. The 300-bed hospital is not ready for this yet. And that's about 20 miles up the road. That's kind of the mothership. And the big mothership in Morgantown, this isn't on the radar at all. That's the, 1,000-bed hospital, 2,000 bed. That's the big academic medical center. But that's how change happens, start small and don't give up. Keep it going.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with guys like David Unwin in the UK, where he's just killing it. I mean, he's demonstrating tremendous cost savings, and so that has to get somebody's attention, and I'm very jaded about some of the motivations some of these administrators have in the hospital CEOs, but I mean, at some point they have to say, look, we're saving X amount of millions of dollars per annum. Is that enough motivation to get you to change what you do? Let me ask, because you mentioned being beat up from running, and you developed presumably insulin resistance and all that stuff. Are you finding that the diet has impacted your athletic career much? I mean, is it soreness, the muscle?
Oh gosh, yeah.
Strains and things like that, sprains and strains getting better now that you've changed diet?
Oh, of course. I mean, everything just moved in the right direction. Is kind of what you notice is what you don't notice. If you become a butter burner, meaning you can make energy, you're good, right? Like you're not, and again, I run now for mental health more, with COVID hospital and everything. It's a mess out here in West Virginia, but no, I did a 100-mile race last fall, and I wore the CGM and I maintained pretty normal blood glucoses. And I think I may have taken in about 1,000 calories over 30 hours, but if you look at how many calories you actually burn, there's no way you can eat that many calories to run 100 miles. Your stomach couldn't handle it, and then kind of just good metabolism. So if I show you kind of what happens if you can make energy, so we don't need to eat energy if you become fat adapted. So here's my glucose monitor today, and you see there's kind of a rise up there in the morning. So that was my morning run. That's not eating. So when I run, and again, like I don't have that first phase insulin response. So like, oh, this is an easy jog and my sugar goes up near 150. So that's not dangerous, right? I think that's fine. But then I eat eggs. Now I'm not running, and now my body's no gluconeogenesis is happening. My muscles will soak that glucose up with that second phase insulin response, and I eat the eggs and with some avocado.
When you hold the monitor to the screen, your voice cuts out. So unfortunately, we can't hear you when you put it up against the screen. So.
Oh, okay, but yeah, you can kind of.
So 118 to the line. So you said when you run in the morning, you have
it goes up,
which is what it's supposed to do. I mean, we're supposed to have glucose to support. I mean, our liver breaks down glycogens once we have intense exercise. So that would be So once it goes up a little bit, then comes down afterwards, and then you had your eggs and no real appreciable rise. Is that what?
Sorry, someone was coming in the room there. I'm in an office here at the hospital. Yeah, so I'll show the screen again, but yeah, you make glucose when you run and then you dispose of it.
Right.
That's the first rise, goes down, and then, stay kind of cool through the day. But I've got some salmon I'm going to have tonight, which will be good. I don't know, maybe I'll have a little bit of green stuff with it, maybe not. But that'll be fine and good to go.
Yeah, let me ask you about, because many people who go on a low carb diet, not all of them, but a significant percentage do see a rise in LDL cholesterol. And how do you personally deal with that in your practice? Is that something, do you do further investigation, or do you tell people don't worry about it, or how do you approach that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you have to at least acknowledge it, because most of the people I see, Shawn, are seeing me like in an obesity metabolic clinic. So they're already sick and insulin resistant. And their LDL is probably the least of their worries at the time. But I won't ignore a high LDL because we know that on coronary artery calcium scores, I'll get the calcium score on people. It costs $99. And the Mitchell studies show that if your calcium score is 0, and I don't see many zeros because most of my patients are diabetic, but if their score is 0, there's no benefit from a statin, even with a high LDL. So sometimes I'll get a patient because they follow social media, diet doctor. They'll see my name out there in the low carb community. So they'll be like an UL person with a high LDL who's kind of getting bullied, about they need to be on a statin or they're going to be fired. So they'll seek me out and we'll order, they're like perfectly well, no insulin resistance, HDLs of 100, trigs of 50 with an LDL of 150. And they're told, you need to be on a statin, or don't come back to my office. Literally, they're kind of put in that position. So then we'll order the score on them. And if they're 0, I mean, we know from the literature and even the AHA's own guidelines, right? So American Heart Association's own guidelines say if your CAC is 0, it's called de-risking, right? We remove that risk, we de-prescribe. So yes, we look at each person as an individual, but if their CAC score, and for those listening, that's coronary artery calcium, if it's off the rails, we know there's some benefit, numbers needed to treat probably 50 to help one, but there's some pleiotropic effect on plaque stabilization. And a water-soluble statin like pravastatin or Livalo, which won't give you the muscle cramping, I'll try to get them on one of those just because we don't know, right? I want to try to stabilize their plaque every means possible. Primarily stabilizing blood glucose is the best way to stabilize plaque. Quit smoking if they smoke. Exercise is really good for stabilizing plaque. So that's really a powerful, whether you do, interval stuff or endurance stuff, just any exercise is really good for plaque stabilization. But look at each case by case. But the CAC score is the triage. Like, is it a problem? Is it not a problem? Or if you had, I think Dave Feldman his study now is using a CT angiogram of the carotid intimal thickness. Carotid intimal thickness. So he's trying to see if these super high lean mass hyperresponders, which would be someone like you or I, Shawn, if our LDLs blew up on a low carb diet, is it a problem or is it just energy transport? And it's good he's doing that study because there's things we don't know, which is why we do science.
Yeah, and I know Dave's been, hopefully he's got it funded for now. I know he's been
Yeah,
funded.
he
I know it's a
does.
slow
Yeah,
process.
he got it funded.
So he's actually got it funding. Okay, good for him. So I know we're still fundraising for our particular intervention we're trying to do here. But one of the things, so obviously you kind of alluded to this COVID-19 pandemic stuff. I mean, clearly it has not done any favors for the country's metabolic health. We've seen, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've seen statistics where the average American has gained 29 pounds or something ridiculous. We've doubled the childhood obesity rate, or some, our childhood diabetes rate, I think, or something like that. Are you seeing that? Are you seeing an increased surge in the number of sick people outside of just suffering from a respiratory illness, but these metabolic issues increasing?
Yeah, well, I mean, my state's the number 1, maybe number 2. If you look, Mississippi and us are a close tie. We're the number 1 obesity and diabetes. So like our practices are all this. So is it increasing? It certainly isn't decreasing. We'll put it that way. So in my small subset, it's was bad and it's just as horrible. The patients we see in the hospital, no different than any other place in the world, they're people with comorbidities, right? They're going to have at least, it's about 90 to 95% have at least one comorbidity, which is a metabolic comorbidity: hypertension, cardiovascular disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes. That's the cohort that gets really sick. Occasionally you'll get an outlier. Delta's a pretty nasty thing. We'll have someone who's otherwise completely well end up in the hospital. But that's not common. The common scenario is someone who's not well, vaccinated, unvaccinated. We're seeing tons of breakthrough cases, right? So if you're not metabolically well, get well. And I wrote an article with Nina Teicholz last summer about this that got published. It was called "Is It Time to Lock Down Sugar?" It got published in the in the sports medicine, clinical journal of sports medicine, after 9 months of peer review. It's like, what the heck about this article is controversial? But it didn't fit that standard narrative at the time, which was just lock everyone down and keep searching for a vaccine, which had not yet been, implemented. But we're like, well, if you do nothing else, take this opportunity to get healthy. But that message just sadly, 19 months into this mess, it's still a lonely message to say, look at your own health. Your best protection is your own health, your host, your response. But I don't know, people are talking about that. Even Sanjay Gupta's talking about it. He talked about that on Joe Rogan's show. It was a good show. I enjoyed listening to that. Pretty deep dive on COVID with Joe Rogan and Sanjay Gupta on his show.
Yeah, and that is something that, just from your perspective as a clinician, a front, guy on the ground, how long does it take to significantly impact someone's metabolic health? Because we've had, like you said, we've had 19, 20 months of this. What is, at the beginning it was like, oh, we don't have time for this, but we are, almost 2 years into this. How long does it take someone to lower their A1C, to lose, a impactful amount of body fat, to reduce their blood pressure? What has your experience been with that?
Yeah, you can do it in a day. So here's a patient here. Here's his readings from yesterday. They're all like green zone 100s. This patient is only on metformin. His sugar was 500 and an A1C of 12 a week ago yesterday. And he was in my cardiac stress lab, 40-year-old guy. And he didn't understand a thing. So we put a monitor on him. And you just saw those readings. Beautiful. So right away, his A1C is not better. That's going to take several months, but his glucose now is normal and stable. His immune response is better now than it was a week ago in spades. When your sugar's 500 every day, your body is under fire, and it's not friendly fire. So if he were to get COVID, it would have been a big hot mess. So now his body is more resilient, and he understands it. But you can change. I have another patient texted me her readings yesterday. She was on 250 units of insulin Friday, like today's Tuesday. And where's her? She sent me her stuff yesterday. Yeah. So here's her glucose monitor from yesterday. It's all in the green. She stopped her insulin. She was 400 pounds. Like, yeah, you can't, how do you live with 250 units of insulin? They just kept dialing up the pen. And just a great story for your crew listening. So here's the story. I walk in, she's my 1 o'clock patient on Friday. I walk in the room and she says, you probably don't remember me. And I said, no, I don't. She says, I was in your cardiac lab 2 years ago. And you explained to me a little bit about the diabetes. Her A1C was 12 at the time. And you said to me, when I'm ready, go see you. You're the only person who's ever talked to me without shaming me. And she was ready. She came back 2 years later, and I hope she can save her life. So we put a glucose monitor on her. And 200, some people can drop the insulin in a day. Others don't. That's why we have to monitor them. And it's like landing a plane. But that's real. And that's why we go to work. And she was tearful after the visit, because I gave her hope. I said, look, I think you can do this. She's like, yeah. And then she has no support. So you just text her every day. Her name's Nicole. Nicole, how's it going today? Right. And she's like, no insulin. I feel okay. Not going to lie. I'm a bit more worried about my high numbers. And her high number was actually like an occasional 150. And she'd been living she wasn't even checking her sugar. She has an A1C at like 12, right? So she's living at like 400. She just no, that's cool. Just stay the course. She's unpacking her liver one day at a time. But that's real. It's not magical thinking, right? We have to explain that. That should be the expectation in clinical medicine when someone comes in on 200, 400, 600 units of insulin. We just keep dialing the pen up. They get sicker, but we just keep dialing the pen up. no, stop. Why that's a disruptive message out there, I don't understand. But
I
it's
can't, I mean, I hear, 400, 500 units a day. That's an
crazy,
enormous
right?
amount.
Sleep apnea, it's good. Yeah, they're dead in the water. They can't even move. They're so tired.
Yeah, my understanding is like the normal human pancreas puts out, 30 to 50 units a day. I mean, that's a normal
20 to
human being.
25 is really the
20,
baseline of type 1 on a pump, right? A well
yeah.
type 1. Yeah, once you're cranking up, double diabetes is huge. Now the type 1s who just keep dialing up the pump. Right now it's 2 units basal an hour, 3 units basal an hour, 4 units basal an hour. They're getting sicker, sicker, sicker because the pump will just keep cranking, cranking, cranking. And I try to help these people unpack that, right? Our goal is get rid of the carbs and let's dial your basal down to human levels, which would be like 1 to 2, 1 unit an hour is a good basal if you have an insulin pump as a type 1. And then, you have a meal, you might basal bolus, but no, these people are on massive doses. They don't know it. They don't realize that the big dose of insulin is a problem.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, if you're on a lot, I mean, I guess the goal should be either get off insulin or have normal blood sugar with as little insulin as possible if you're a
Yeah,
type 1, I suppose.
yeah,
When you,
basal.
here's another thing, we're continuing about this, pandemic stuff, vitamin D, there's been a significant association with vitamin D sufficiency and outcomes. And I mean, I don't know if glucose, if they've looked at that, there's probably a study on that, I'm sure there is, but is there any attempt by hospitals to optimize glucose? I mean, obviously, well, I guess they give them a big slug of insulin, but any thoughts on what about vitamin D? And do you feel that vitamin D, I tend to think that vitamin D status kind of reflects your metabolic health, and as much as it represents what's going in your diet. That is to say, if you have poor overall metabolic health, maybe you don't have some of these other nutrients dialed in, your vitamin D status is going to be low. Is that something you're seeing, or how do you deal?
Yeah, I don't know if it's cause or effect, but I test a lot of vitamin D, and across the board, most people tend to be low. Um, I take vitamin D, I work inside all day and I check my level like once a year. I'm trying to keep it, last check, it was like 45 and I take like, 5,000 a day. And that's just to keep it at 45, because I'm not out, maybe Arizona, if you're a lifeguard or something, you'd be good to go. Um, but whether it's a marker or an effect, but either way, I think everyone should probably know what their vitamin D level is. Get sun if you can, and replace it if you're low. But also, if you're low and you have insulin resistance, address the insulin resistance, because I don't know if by reversing insulin resistance in itself, it has, positive effect on vitamin D. And the counter to that would be, do we replace vitamin D, and does that help the insulin resistance? But bottom line is get rid of the sugar, and then whatever you're going to do will probably sort out in the end. But just measure your levels, because I think you're just guessing unless you know the levels. And if it's expensive through your healthcare plan to get a vitamin D, so I get all my labs done, at a draw center online. Like one site's called Ulta Labs, and you can just go in yourself and order a vitamin D for $20 and show up at the lab. You get A1C for $20. So like, don't be intimidated that, oh, these labs cost. Just go get them on the open market. You're allowed to do that, and as long as you have someone that can interpret the lab for you. So if you're working with Sean or a health coach, a Revero health coach, you get a battery of labs. Like that's the only caution. If you just own, I think there's another one called Own Your Own Labs, another site. You could do all this stuff on yourself, but just make sure someone can help you interpret that. Don't go online and just randomly type something in, because there's a lot of issues. Say you're not sleeping, stress and stuff. But yeah, get your vitamin D checked, get out in the sun. It's all good.
Yeah, I mean, that's good. I've seen the Ulta labs. They are very cheap.
Yeah, it's great.
They're nice. You get a third of the price or something like that. So,
You can get the
when
LPIR score too, $99. It's good test.
Yeah, I've had mine, and I had mine a few years ago, and it was very low, and all that stuff. When I checked that stuff, so it's pretty interesting to see it, along with the zero CAC.
And
And
for men, testosterone, right? A lot of men are kind of who are overworked, overstressed, overexercised. They may be low T, and then they can kind of see where because there's a lot of natural ways to boost your T, versus, if you're insulin resistant and you've got a big belly, you'll boost your T just by getting rid of the belly fat. But that's another one that's pretty cheap, but have someone who knows what they're doing interpret that, and how to reverse it without taking testosterone, because it always has a root cause.
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I get a lot of pushback for sort of pushing back against blanket testosterone supplementation.
Yeah, no,
As a
no.
physician, I see guys on testosterone replacement, and they were still fat and overweight, and it wasn't making any difference that I could tell. I'm saying, why are you on this stuff? And I'd say probably, you correct me if I'm wrong, I'm saying the vast majority of people that probably are on it probably would have done just as well to address metabolic health, spend a year, clean up their lifestyle, getting on exercise. I mean, is that kind of where you're coming from?
Yeah, I think you have to look at if someone truly has hypogonadism, what's their LH, a couple other markers. But if they have a big belly, they got insulin resistance, and they're not zero on the T, but they're on the low side, fix the insulin resistance. And then you're going to lose the belly fat, the gynecomastia, all that stuff will go away. And it's that aromatase conversion, estrogen to T will start working normal again. And sleep, we recover in sleep. But there's organ meats. I think organ meats have get those really rich nutrients, going to help. I don't know if there's any data on some of the ancestral supplements. There's supplements out there which have like bovine testicles. Maybe I don't know. Do you have any opinion if there's any data on just not like taking tea, but like taking a supplement that might have some, there's a lot of stuff out there, but there's supplements, there's no studies. What's your take on that, Shawn? Like if someone just takes a supplement, or, ashwagandha, fenugreek, or a couple supplements people have used, for tea. But any thoughts you have just on outside of fixing the metabolism, supplementation
Well, I mean,
wise?
I think the answer is we don't really know at this point. I mean, if you look back in the history of, how they discovered some of these hormones, it was old guys in around 1900 eating lamb testicles and noticing they felt more. There's literature goes in that, and so does it when you sort of concentrate on in a supplement form. Does it help? I mean, certainly theoretically it could. We just haven't seen data. I know the data on the carnivore community that David Ludwig has gathered, they didn't seem to see a difference as far as the major outcomes: diabetes reversal, blood pressure improvement, weight loss with or without supplementation or organ meat. So it's interesting, although anecdotally I've seen a lot of people say that I do feel better when I do this. And it may be, some of that may be, there may be a sort of a, where you're starting from. If you come to this, on a very nutrient depleted situation, you've been abusing your body, treating your body like a trash can for 3 or 4 decades, you're calorie replete, but nutrient depleted, then you may be in a different situation than somebody that's been taking care of themselves, and it may change over time. So at this point, I say try it. If it works, it works. It's not like a lot of this stuff is, go look in the mirror and see what you think. I mean, the ultimate, at the end of the day, it's what matters to the individual. Their subjective, how they wake up and feel every day is more important than, a lab I check, quite honestly, I think. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on
Yeah.
that.
Oh,
But,
amen to that. How you recover and how you feel in your exercise. Deep sleep, we know, has a very positive effect on any of our hormones. So people who are taking Ambien or who have sleep apnea and they have low T, they got to fix that before they're going to fix their T, because they don't get that stage 3 to 4 sleep. And that's where growth hormone, testosterone, all of these restorative hormones start to reset, or you just night shift work. So many factors. Find a good clinician or coach. This is my advice. That's why you guys are in the room here. You're trying to help people.
yeah, that's one of the things you pointed out, and this is one of the, well, I mean, let me just, before I talk about that, so the ADA, and I can't remember her name, president of the American Dietetic Association, was a type 2 diabetic who improved her
Tracy
diabetes
Brown.
tremendously by going. Yeah, she did that by going low carb. She's no longer the president of the ADA, and I wonder if there's
Sadly, yeah, I
a
don't know the
relationship.
story there. Yeah, she works for Walgreens now. She one of their head corporate, but I don't know if she was run out or if I'm sure there was some backlash after that.
Because the ADA, if I'm not mistaken, has now accepted low carb provisionally as a potential
Mm-hmm.
as a pattern for diabetes. So that's at least a little bit of inroads there. But
Yeah, and they acknowledged diabetes remission. It was the 2020 nutritional guidance for type 2 diabetes. Low carbohydrate eating is the most impactful way to reduce blood glucose. So that's in their own document. It's like page 52 of the supplement. So yeah, that one paragraph says it all, right? It's the most effective way to reduce blood glucose.
Do you find like, obviously you're doing something that many physicians don't do is de-prescription of medications. Yes. Most people are increasing dosage, changing medications, dealing with the side effects. And, if you look at like the PDR or whatever drug insert you want to look at there, to my knowledge, there's not a lot of information on de-prescribing. Is there a reference you can use to say, hey, if I'm going to get somebody off this drug, I'm going to do it this way. These are the issues. Is that data out there for physicians?
Heck yeah, funny you asked that question. So our friend David Unwin, I was the lead author in a paper in Frontiers published 2 months ago on medication reduction in type 2 diabetes. We had 30 authors from 4 continents, a bunch in the UK. Eric Westman was on there, like a number of, really luminaries in the field. We had pharmacists on there. We had RDs in there. So we had multitude of fields, NPs in there. So we basically a collaborative paper. I'll share it with you, Shawn, so you could share it with the group. It's open access in Frontiers of Nutrition. I think it's got like 10,000 downloads now too. And Diet Doctor even made a little video with Brett Scher, and someone sent it to me. I didn't even know he made it. It was where Brett was talking about de-prescribing is his new favorite word. So yeah, I wrote an article 4 years ago on this with David Unwin, Campbell Murdoch over in the UK. That was the first article published on this topic specifically. It's kind of crazy, right? There's millions of articles published on how to prescribe, but there hadn't been a single article until our first article, like in 2016, 17 on this topic. And then we revised it with this article just published. And yeah, it goes through the whole, it's like anything. There's a scientific way to do it. There's a right and a wrong way to do it. It's like any clinical procedure, but I'm proud of the paper. It took a lot of work and I had wonderful partners, helping me with this paper, but it's the power of the group. It's like 30 authors from across the globe chiming in. People in Malaysia, Asia, Australia. It was great, wonderful. Be part of that and put it together. Getting a paper to the finish line is hard. I think that makes you really learn the science if you've got to, do all the final edits and answer all the editor's queries. And the long you've written, Shawn, it's a long process, but you got to do it. If we're going to change the world, we have to publish our work, just like you're looking to do research, right, with your group. It ain't easy. It ain't cheap, but you got to do it. You got to get the answers.
It's an expensive ordeal. But let me ask you. So we're running low on time. But what is next for you? Are you just going to keep grinding, heading to San? Do you have any big projects coming up, or anything you'd like to share with us about what's going on?
Yeah, we have a pediatric trial. We're getting IRB, which for those listening, that's Institutional Review Board. We have to go, like any study, human subjects, you got to make sure that all of your ethical practices. So we're doing a low carb intervention for children with severe obesity. Now that method has been used, and even in the OMA, Obesity Medicine Association's own guideline, this is the most effective treatment for pediatric obesity in their own guideline, but yet no one is doing it. There was a really good MedPage article, I'll send you this too, that came out over the weekend, and I commented on it right away, and it led to a flurry of different comments. The author of that MedPage article was one of the writers of the OMA guideline, and the OMA guideline, best evidence was low carb, but in her article, she pretty much dismissed low carb and talked about kind of low GI, fruits, whole grains, which is kind of the standard line, like just give up junk food, have fruits and whole grains. But if you're an obese child with insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia, my hypothesis and the evidence shows it's not going to work. So she writes in the article that all her patients are coming back gaining weight. But why we have to look at our own, but it's not like people can't admit, well, maybe my practice is wrong. Duke just published an article on kids, on low carb for kids, right? It's hard because the whole family has to do it, right? It's hard to send a second grader to school with their own lunch when everyone else is drinking chocolate milk. So it ain't easy, but it really is the only way out. I'm sorry, if you're a child with fatty liver and insulin resistance, show me another way out of that outside of reducing insulin resistance, which is reducing carbohydrates. I haven't seen it. David Ludwig would certainly back me up on that. Robert Lustig, all of these folks are in the pediatric world writing about this. Or Richard Bernstein, Dr. Bernstein and his type 1s, like they have miraculous results. But yeah, so we're going to study kids and give them support. Like we have an RD as part of our grant who's going to be on the dashboard with these families. How you doing? Can I help you with recipes? It's a cool project. So more to come, right? So get it approved and start doing the work.
Yeah, that's one thing I wanted to ask you about fatty liver. It's because people ask me, I'm being told that, if I eat saturated fat, I'm going to get a fatty liver. And that's not what I've seen clinically.
Oh.
What are your thoughts on fatty liver
Yes.
reduction? Is eating meat and eggs going to give you a fatty liver?
No, because actually they changed the nomenclature, so used to be alcoholic fatty liver disease. Then we started seeing 10-year-olds with it, and you're in my career, Shawn. So then they had to come up with some other name. So they called it non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Okay, well, Robert Lustig showed in 9 days, just getting off of the sugared drinks, even eating pizza, you can start to reverse it. But the new nomenclature is MAFLD, metabolically associated fatty liver disease, because it's insulin resistance, it's de novo lipogenesis, fructose going mainline to the liver. Our livers have no evolutionary capacity to deal with liquid carbohydrates, right? I'll enjoy an occasional foie gras every now and then. How about you, Shawn, if you're at a nice French restaurant? A little pate, right? So they pour fructose down the gullet of a goose to make this delicious fatty liver. But eating fat does not cause fatty liver. And being fat doesn't mean you have fatty liver. It's the silent scream. So having the fatty liver will drive the insulin resistance, which will drive the hyperinsulinemia, which will drive the obesity. So really it's root cause, might be the liver, but metabolically associated fatty liver disease, unless those 10-year-olds tend not to be drinking tequila as the reason. But yeah, you can unpack it, and the bariatric surgeons call it the liver shrinking diet. If you put that in your search engine, the liver shrinking diet before bariatric surgery is an extremely carb restricted diet. Because if you're going to take someone's small intestines out and the liver's in the way, they want the liver smaller before surgery. Don't mean to be, dramatic about that, but that is what it is, right? But let's try to do this without taking their intestines out. Let's just keep doing it, right? Let's keep them on the diet, because this is just a human diet.
Yeah, I think Robert Sivas is a good one to talk to about that.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah. Bob Sivas, get him on the show. Yep, he sees it. He puts them on, and he talks about the addiction, in a big way. He treats addiction in his bariatric surgery clinic. Whether he operates on them or not, they have sugar addiction. It's a problem.
Yeah, that's a true topic. All right, Mark, unfortunately, I have to go to another meeting, but it's been an absolute pleasure.
Good.
Thank you so much for
you guys are great, and I'll send you
the
article on the med reduction as well as the med page thing on the kids. I think it's an interesting read.
That would be awesome. I'll share that to other people because I'm sure a lot of people can benefit.
Yeah, very,
where can
very
people
readable.
go to find out if folks want to pursue you as a physician or find out more about you on social media? Where can they go?
Yeah, I have a website called drmarksdesk.com. And then I wrote a book called Run for Your Life, which really isn't that much about running, but more about health. So runforyourlifebook.com is another place you could find me. And I think you can connect by email on either of those pages if you want to reach out. I see in West Virginia, but with COVID, we can see patients from any of the bordering states. We do telemedicine too. So if people just need a another ear and you're in one of those states, I can help you.
All right. Awesome. Thanks
Thank you.
very much, Mark. The rest of you guys, I'll see everybody back tomorrow. You guys have a great day. Take care and see you soon. Bye-bye, everybody.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Join Revero.health for a 30-day free trial to get access to live Q&A with VIP guests, social community meetings, member discounts, low-carb healthcare providers list, forum, workouts, monthly challenges, early access to podcasts, recipes, carnivore diet guide, fasting guide, shred guide, and much more.